All right. Glad you could all join. It's I find myself sometimes getting ready for this call. I tend to start thinking about them on the Friday before, and then I kind of think some more about it over the weekend, and it makes me excited for Mondays. I used to, when I was in the software industry, I would have what they called Sunday night dreads. You just start getting this angst, like, oh crap, I got to be working. I hope you feel the same way in this industry. If you don't, let's talk. I get excited on Sunday nights because it's like, yep, we got stuff to do. Let's go. Maybe because the paychecks are bigger than in the software industry. So, all right. Thanks for being on the call. We are going to cover something today that I hope will be beneficial for you. Maybe in the short, near term, you'll understand that in a second. But first, I want to start with any contract negotiation wins. Now, remember, last week we talked about a framework or sorry, 2 weeks ago, we talked about a framework for resolving issues. This is where it's going to be participatory. So everybody unmute yourself, chime in. What were the 5 steps for resolving an issue? What's the first one, Parker?
Oh, snap, dude. I got to pull up my notes. I was not ready for this.
I'll cue you up.
Listen.
Actively listen, not just listen, actively listen.
Yes.
And we talked about a whole suite of things to make us truly effective listeners, not just, oh, what I heard you say, Parker, was blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that doesn't work for most people, right? Okay, what was the second one? Dan, if you listen, then what?
You rephrase the concern.
Close. That's number 3. Number 2. Well, that could be, Dan, that could be part of active listening. So I'll give you that. Jake, what were you saying?
Ask questions to help get to a solution.
And I'm going to refine this. I'm not picking it apart, but I want to make sure we drive home the points. Ask intentional, meaningful, authentic questions, right? Don't ask just the knee-jerk, memorized. I want you to just channel anytime you have conversations with your significant other. That should kind of direct our conversations with our clients, right? If you pop off and just, what I heard you say, Nancy, was that you think I'm a blah, 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 she'd be like, oh my gosh, don't game me. And then if I just asked her a question and said, oh, so is that important to you? The reaction I'd get, right? So instead, kind of channel that how you would work with a significant relationship and try and incorporate it with your clients. I mean, I'm going to pause here for a second. Any of you have that client or several of those clients where you're on your 5th, 6th, 7th transaction with the same client over like 10 years? That's a relationship, guys. You got to treat it like one, right? And usually if you have 5, 6, 7 transactions with somebody, that means you're doing it right. Okay. So, all right. So we have listen, questions. What's the third one, Dan?
You resolve concerns. You restate.
There you go. Paraphrase, restate, and isolate. Why that last one? Why isolate?
You want to get down to the real issue.
Thank you, Terry. That is the reason, right? Sometimes we start here. It's the concern that gets raised, but in reality, as you ask more questions, you paraphrase and restate it, you end up over here. And you just have to kind of chuckle inside because they'll start off really like super committed to this, and through some meaningful questions and watching the temperature go down, you're like, oh, look at that. We ended up over here. Here's the real issue. All right, what's the fourth one? Anyone?
Get a commitment from them. How
That's
to move
5.
forward.
That's 5, Carrie. Good job. But before that,
find a solution, handle their objections.
Find a solution, right? That's why they're not really calling to just vent. That's their human nature. They want to be heard first. But in reality, most people want to figure out a way to solve the problem. So after you've done those first 3 steps, you should be equipped with enough stuff to be like, hey, Parker, or I'm sorry, I'm picking on Parker. Jake, listen, appreciate all that, blah, 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 question, restate, rephrase. What would you say if? What do you think if? This is where the proposal comes in. Don't turn it around. Don't ruin all the first 3 good steps and be like, well, you know what we're going to do from here, right? This is a collaborative effort. So I like the approach of where you're like, hey, Jake, listen, here's what I'm thinking. I want to know your thoughts. What if we were to do this, this, and this? How abrasive does that come off? It's not, right? I'm totally putting him in the driver's seat. And you know what? That takes a little risk. Because you know what, you might have to go through the first 3 things again if that 4th step doesn't work. But the last one is, what's the last one? You just said it, Carrie.
Well, we've come to this solution. Now find a commitment to move forward.
Commitment. So Carrie, thank you for going through that with me. I'm excited about the solution we've talked about. If we can implement that, you think we can stay on track with, closing by such and such a date? I don't care what the commitment is. Get some type of a commitment. That's not just for our benefit, right? Anytime you work with somebody and you get a level of commitment from them, the actual probability of success goes up. And it's not just because they agreed to it. It's because in their own mind, they've committed to it and they're going to put more energy at it. Okay. All right. So that was a great little rehearsal of the past week. So here's what I want to know. Did anybody have any success with it in the past 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Good, Parker.
Oh shit. Sorry. I thought I was muted. Sorry.
No, that's
No,
great.
yeah, I had a couple of examples this last couple of weeks where I've really tried to implement a lot of that. One of the things I really tried to implement was important, significant, and mean, right? The 3 deep questions, or the acronym ISM, as you all know. And I have found my conversations to be a lot more meaningful, and I've gotten to the core of the issue much faster, which has allowed me to be significantly more effective in the discussions that I'm having on one-on-ones with people.
Yeah.
So that was really big, but it also works really well with real estate agents. I had one of my agents come to my office. They were having a funding and some issues happened where the warranty deed was recorded, but the trust deed wasn't recorded. And so the seller's agent was like, well, we're not handing over keys. And so I had to have a discussion with her based on the contract that said, well, the trust deed is an agreement between the lender and the buyer, not between the seller and the buyer. The warranty deed is that deed, and you need to let my buyers go ahead and move in. And instead of being like a jerk about it and being like, hey, more on
You know your contract. What the hell's wrong?
Yeah. It was more like, hey, let me understand a little bit more about why this specifically is important to you. And it allowed us just to have a really open conversation where we work together to resolve a problem, as opposed to being like, hey, I know my contracts and you don't, and yada, yada, yada.
That was a great example, Parker, and I'm aware of the situation. And you know what? I heard about this on Friday. I was up north and I'm like, I'm going to see if Parker can handle this or if he's going to give me a call. So good job.
I put my big boy pants on.
Nice. Woo-woo. Okay. Well, listen, today, thank you for that. And I hope you really do. Remember that acronym of ISM. What's important? What's significant? What would it actually mean, right? What would it mean if? And I think as you do that, it'll just change your framework of when you're asking questions. First, it's going to remind you to ask questions. Don't just take the first response. It's going to make you not just seem, you really will you'll have a better relationship with people because you know that saying, be more curious and less judgmental? You ever heard that one? It's really true. Be more curious and less judgmental, and you'll get a lot more traction. And so that ISM kind of is a tactical step-by-step to kind of do that, right?
Does this apply to politics at all?
What's that, Dan?
Does be more curious and less judgmental apply to politics at all, or no?
Yes, but we won't hold you to that high standard, Dan. No, it's funny because you can look at different areas in life and just see where people are good at it And since Dan brought up politics, yeah, there's zero interest in really understanding the other side, or at least it appears that way. You don't see the debates like, hey, help me understand your position on this. Why is that significant? What would it mean if? Yeah, no, it's a game of gotcha. And I think that's why people are so annoyed with politics, because it does nothing to bring the temperature down. In fact, it just inflates the temperature. So good negative example, Dan.
No, it really is though, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody cares to understand the other side, right? And then therefore there is never any kind of like understanding of where people are coming from. There's just pure judgmental, and yeah, like I was obviously kidding, but like that is a perfect example of how not to do it, right?
For sure. Great example. And you know what? When people talk politics, almost always, or watch people talking politics, you come away, you just feel taxed. See what I did there? Politics taxed. Come on, guys. That was good. It was Monday. Politics taxed. No, all joking aside, it is. It's exhausting. You're just like, oh my gosh. If you see it on TV, you're probably quick to grab the remote and like, yeah, don't even want to see that. Move, change channel. All right. So what are we going to cover today? I wanted to cover something that really isn't big yet, but I'm promising you it's coming. And that has to do with short sales. Short sales. Short sales. How many of you on the call have ever dealt with a short sale? Raise your hand. I want to see on the screen.
Hey, Matt, it's funny you say that. I'm looking at homes right now for a client, and in their criteria, there's 4 short sales. I haven't seen this many short sales in 12 years, 13 years.
Yeah, they're coming, guys.
To that point, like another way to ask this question, Matt, is who's been in the business for more than 10 years?
Yeah, that's a good starter. Yeah. If you've been here more than 10 years, you've probably seen short sales. If you're less than 10 years, no offense, but we just haven't had them, right? So, oh man, James, you're making me homesick for my dog. All right, let's get into it. So what would be your quick definition of a short sale? James and his dog are stealing the show.
Dude, that was the most picturesque idea of man's best friend that I've ever seen.
Cute.
That was awesome.
And I just want to say, Don, thank you for finally turning on your video. Anybody else, listen, you don't have to have your video on, but it's just disrespectful to the rest of us. So, turn your video on.
Leave it to me to be disrespectful.
All right. What's the definition? What is your quick definition of a short sale?
Yeah, when the sales price, agreed upon sales price is less than what is owed on the property, so short of what is owed on the property.
Perfect. Anybody want to add to that? Because I think that's a very succinct definition.
Well, the lender has to agree to take a short payoff.
True. True. And we're going to get into that, Don. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm just going to start off with this. When we did have a lot of short sales, oh my gosh, people were all over the map of what it meant, who was required to sign, when you were actually under contract, and so on and so on. So let me just start with Don's point. And I'm going to bring up docs here in just a minute, as you guys know I'm going to do. I've got 3 docs, and we're going to go through them in pretty rapid fashion. But remember this, it's still a REPSI. There's still a buyer and a seller who have agreed to terms. Now, using Dan's example, I'm going to use round numbers for my benefit, not for yours. If the house is worth $550,000 and what is actually owed is $600,000, we're short of what is owed to the lender, correct? And the lender, it doesn't have to be a traditional lender. You'll see this in the document. It can be a hard money lender. It can be an aunt or an uncle who has interest in the property, a recorded interest against the property. But most often it is a traditional lender. And to Don's point, even though Susan and Carrie could go under contract as buyers and sellers and agree to sell it at $550, there is a huge contingency, and it is Don the banker who's going, wait a minute, I'm owed $600,000 and I have paperwork that says I'm owed that before anything else happens. So I'm what is known as a huge contingency. I'm also known as third-party approval. So there's provisions in the REPSI and the corresponding addendum that says that's cool that buyer and seller get together and agree to terms, but the third party who's being asked to lose money, let's be very specific, has the right to come in and propose modifications to the terms of the contract. Third party approval. Okay. With that said, let me bring up.
Matt, that includes commissions.
Yeah, it does. You remember, don't you, Parker? That basically what Parker's bringing up is back in the day when we would ask a bank to take a $50,000-$60,000 hit. It wouldn't be uncommon for the bank to come back and say, well, if we're taking a hit, the seller's going to take a hit, and you as the realtors are going to take a hit. And that was not uncommon. All right, let's see here. All right. So let's start with this document first. This is the, you all can see that okay, or do I need to zoom in? Man, nobody got that. Zoom in, come on. You guys are dry on Monday morning. Let's have some fun, come on. Okay, so short sale disclosure. Listen, I bring this up first for a reason. Don't embark on the short sale process until you've done the disclosure. Why? There's a good legal reason why. Back in the day, when we had a lot of short sales, it wasn't uncommon either for somebody to come back after the fact and say, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I didn't know X, Y, or Z. Nobody explained this to me. I didn't even really understand what a short sale was. And I didn't understand it's going to impact my credit, or there might be tax consequences, or. So Utah Association of Realtors, if you look down at the bottom, this was last revised in 2009, which was in the heat of the meltdown. And they said, you know what, we're going to get ahead of this, and we're going to make sure we have a short sale disclosure so that people can't come back and say, I didn't know. So let's quickly go through these things. Notice there isn't one for the seller or the buyer. You check whoever you're representing, the document's the same for either side because it's pretty exhaustive. Now listen, I'm going to say at a minimum, you probably want to read this one verbatim, to the buyer or seller, right? But then it gets into, well, let's hit the quick highlights. It just defines, like Dan said, it's short of what is owed. Third parties have a stake in this, to Don's point, and oh, by the way, it could include the IRS or the state tax commission and monies owed. So the list of interested third-party people is pretty exhaustive, okay? Then we go into a specific term that will be used in the short sale addendum, and is third-party approval. And it talks about that. And even if, right, buyer and seller advised that even if they reach an agreement, meaning the REPSI, until you get the condition third-party approval, you're really not going anywhere with this contract, okay? So all that's pretty mundane, pretty straightforward, but I'm telling you, a lot of the public doesn't even know those first two paragraphs. So probably a good idea to explain that to them. Then they get into the specifics of what are the rights of the third party, right? Or sorry, what the third party can do, and then whether the buyer and seller have to accept them. So the third party is going to come back, right? And they're going to say, well, listen, I think you're underselling the property. I think, you've got it under contract in my previous example of 550 and we're owed 600. We did AVM, an automated valuation model, and we think it should sell for 575. So we will agree to allow it to be sold for 575, but that means, Mr. Buyer, you have to up your offer from 550 to 575, right? And you know what the reality is? Buyer may not have that type of money, or they may not qualify. So that is a significant thing. But the third party has the right to do that. And then the second half of that paragraph is pretty important. It says, seller and the buyer are not obligated to accept any of the requested third-party modifications. So this becomes a very fluid, moving transactions when they happen, okay? Paragraph 4, pretty important. banks move slow. I don't know if you guys know that, but they tend to move slowly. And so this is the appropriate disclosure. Hey, I know you guys are going to put a date in the contract for third-party approval, but there's no guarantee that the third party is going to respond by that date. And we'll come back to that. Now, here's the one, Parker, you said you're looking at some for a buyer, and there's a couple of short sales in there. I hope everybody realizes this. The bank absolutely has the right to require the seller to accept additional offers. What does that mean for the guy or gal who put their offer in first? What does it really mean?
Means you better not stop looking.
You better, why? Parker, why is that important?
Well, because at any time, I mean, the rest of the paragraphs are pretty enlightening, but at really any time, it just says that the seller can accept, or sorry, when I say the seller, the bank can really accept whatever offer is within the bank's best interest.
So let's
and that takes priority over first priority, second priority, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, good. So let's think about it this way. Using my same example, bank is owed 600. We have it listed, for 550. Offer number one comes in at 550, right? And before we get third-party approval, second offer comes in at 575. And the bank requires that that you continue to market it and there be backup offers. Guess what they're probably not going to approve? Offer number one. Right? They will not give third-party approval for that because they have another one sitting there at 575 and they're not interested in losing 50. They're interested in only losing 25. And so when you work with buyers and as short sales become more prevalent, I think it is important for us to make sure we have a sit down with them so they're not frustrated. This is the biggest the biggest reason in my book. Unless you explain this to them up front, you're going to have somebody that down the road is pretty pissed off and frustrated, right? Because if I was working with Jake, I'd be like, cool, Jake, we got this property, it's actually worth, 600, but we're getting a short sale. So we're going to get it $25,000, $30,000 under sales price. And he's going to be all jacked up about that and excited and thinks he has a solid straight line path to getting that house. In a short sell, it's nothing but a straight line. There's all types of contingencies and you can be bumped out. You can be bumped out of position. So if I haven't done my job with Jake and be like, Jake, dude, seriously, short sales are not a bad deal, right? In fact, if you can get one to go through, if you have a cooperating bank on the other side, if the delta between what is owed versus what we can bring isn't too large and nobody else inserts themselves by way of a backup offer or three, then you might end up with a sweet property. Notice what I did? I put all the ifs in there because I want him to understand those things are out of my control. They're out of his control. That way, if those things materialize, I've future paced him and he knows that was a possibility, as opposed to just letting it happen. Be like, oh, sorry, dude. Yeah, somebody else came in and they beat you out on the offer. I thought I was under contract. Well, you kind of were, but I didn't do a good job of explaining it. And here's why they're able to do that. Guess who's not going to want to work with me anymore? Jake. So
Matt, I think painting a realistic picture is really important for the buyer, right? There's a lot of ifs in short sales. Matter of fact, the one thing that's certain in a short sale is the if part of it, right?
Yep.
So I think it's really important though, when we're talking to buyers to say, look, this is the process. If this happens, if this, you should not stop looking at other homes. And the reason why is because one thing we know that's happening is prices are continuing to rise. So the same property that you have your hopes up for 500,000, which is likely going to sell for 550 or 575, we could have already found you another property. And by the way, buyer, just notice right here where it says buyer or seller may cancel the proposed short sale transaction in accordance with the terms and conditions of the short sale addendum. This means that you can cancel at any time if we find you another property that works just as good, if not better, and can increase your wealth incrementally at a faster pace.
Yeah, and so great point, Parker. And so I think the point is, hey, Jake, listen, I represent you. I want to do everything I can to help benefit you and get a great property. But I need to disclose to you upfront, just my experience, short sales are far from a slam dunk. Fair enough? Right? And what's he going to say? Oh, okay, yeah, well, what do you mean? And I'm going to go through the various things that we just talked about, a lot of them covered here in the short sale disclosure. So listen, let's get that offer submitted. And to your point, Parker, let's not stop looking at other properties, because this one could take a long time. And when the seller, the buyer, the third party can essentially cancel the contract at any time without ramifications, I don't want you to get down that path and be frustrated. So let's go in parallel. Let's be doing one that's not short sale and one that is. And then if the short sale goes through, sweet, we just got you a great deal. Fair enough. And then I'm going to move on, right? All right.
Matt,
Can
Yes.
you,
Matt, this is James. I'm wondering, and maybe I missed this as I was running off my dog for a minute, but has the timing of short sales changed from years ago when it could take 9, 12, 15 months?
Yeah, so it's a good question, James. I don't know if we have enough data currently, but here's what I would say. Back in 2008, 2009, 11, and 12, banks had very formalized process for dealing with short sales, right? They had whole teams dedicated to it. Well, since we haven't had them for a decade, or at least in any significant numbers, my guess is the timeline has probably increased since then. And until they become more part of the course of business, we'll probably have longer timeframes, because you're dealing with fewer resources at the bank dedicated to short sales.
Okay, I would
Matt?
add something, and that is, having done a lot of these years ago, first of all, for each of your clients that you're dealing with these, as there are more of them, it's kind of like managing a 3-ring circus and trying to keep track of where you are in the process of them. But the second thing is, a lot of times buyers need a place to live and they want to look at short sales, and those two things don't go together very well.
yeah,
Yeah, the first word is, are you very, very flexible on your timeline, right? If you want to do a short sale, that maybe should be one of the first questions. And if the answer is no, then be like, then a short sale is probably not for you. Okay. All right.
can
So
we, Matt, sorry,
Yeah.
just going back to section 1, short sale defined, you have highlighted in red, and I think this is actually really important. I think a lot of people miss this, and James, I don't know, maybe you can attest to this because you did short sales in the past, but I think it's really important now that we talk about bankruptcy trustees, state, federal, local taxing authorities as lien holders, plus, you know, the other people who have liens on the property, work, you know, master electricians, or, you know, whatever the case is. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the pecking order?
Well, so listen, it's a great question, and I'm not trying to dodge, but I want to make sure I get through the other two documents. Let me put it in this broad category, Parker. I'm glad my point in highlighting that was to be like, don't allow yourself to get target fixation and think, oh, all I have to do is deal with the bank. It's not true.
Yeah.
You might have to deal with the IRS. You might have to work with state tax commission. You might have what's the Child Protective Services, or who's the one that gets the money from people divorced?
Definitely not Child Protective, ORS.
ORS, that's the one I was thinking of, right? Office of Recovery Services, they may have, you know, a judgment against the property. So there are potentially more than just one third party that's going to have to approve. So it's a good point. Don't just get target fixation that is just a lender. Okay. I want to jump now to the actual
Let me
short.
just add that I do know people that got 1099s for the differential
Yep,
back in the day.
that's right. It was a benefit to you, and you're going to be taxed on it. Good point. All right. Yeah, the IRS is always going to find a way to squeak some money out, right? All right. So
Wasn't there a document though that you could have your client sign that cleared them? I swear I did that with my clients.
yeah, so Marianne, it's a good question. Depending on who was going to approve, and by the way, if let me say it this way. If the IRS says, if you get a benefit, a financial benefit, I don't care what document you sign, I'm the IRS. And if I say you got a financial benefit and it falls in the income of a financial benefit to you, I have the right to tax you, and good luck fighting me. Right?
I mean,
So-
my clients were able to get through a few of them that I had, but the other observation I had with the short sales was you would get buyers that were really excited because people told them there's a really good deal. So those ones that wanted to move, you'd show them a few short sales, right? Multiple offers on short sales. Then they would ultimately buy a home that wasn't a short sale. But there were clients that were hell bent on buying a short sale. And I dealt with a few of those, I'm sure everybody did, that it would take 2-3 years for them to buy a short sale.
I'm so glad you said this, and it's why I started off with a review of our framework. Why is a short sale so significant to you? Why is it important? Can you help me understand this? Right? What would it mean if I got you a home with just as much equity, but you didn't have to go through the short sale? Right? This is why we dig in and ask more and more questions, so that one, we can have a quicker transaction, two, so that our clients are more satisfied, which means they're probably going to use us again and refer us. Okay. All right. Short sale addendum. I have this first paragraph in a red rectangle block because for me, this is a reminder. I'm going to read this one verbatim with them. Right? It's basically a rehash, a smaller condensed version of what we did in the short sale disclosure. But so I'm going to pivot here for just a second. If you're not creating your own documents with highlights as we go through these contracts, what's that saying? Out of sight equals out of mind. And I've offered over and over again, anybody who wants the marked documents that we cover, to remind them of what we talked about, and so that you can create your own physical file. So when you meet with somebody, you bring this up and boom, there's your refresher course. Take me up on it. I'll send them to you, or be marking your own. So for me, the red box is to remind me, yep, read that one verbatim. Okay. All right. This one goes into the very specifics of third-party approval and what it means, right? And again, all of those parties that we talked about previously, but it specifically puts them in this simple category of third parties. The seller and the buyer, right, have agreed to the terms. This is when third-party approval takes place. When those three entities, however many that is, meaning in the third-party category, have agreed in writing to the terms of the short sale addendum, right, as provided in section 2.1 through 2.3 below. And how do we memorialize it? Oh, there's a document called Acknowledgement of Third-Party Approval Addendum. So I don't want an email, I don't want a text, and this would happen all the time. Well, I have a text, I have an email from the bank, blah, blah, blah. The contract requires it to be memorialized in the Acknowledgement of Third-Party Approval Addendum, right? Everybody's already agreeing to this because it is part of the REPC. Okay. And this will reiterate some points, and you'll see some common language, especially down in 2.2 and 2.3. So up until the time, and when we receive the additional third-party requirements, then for the seller's consent to the additional third-party requirements may be withheld by the seller in the seller's sole discretion. In other words, the seller doesn't have to give a reason. There's nobody who has to look at this. It's basically unchallengeable. If the seller simply says, I don't know, I'm on a crazy day, don't want to approve what the third party wants, I'm out. Same thing for the buyer, right? So this is why, to Parker's point earlier, and Marianne, to your point, and several others, when you're working short sales, if you do your job and explain what this actually means, right, to the transaction, that it can blow up at any time with no repercussions, are you sure that's the way you want to go? Again, tell me what's important about a short sale to you. Why is it significant? What would it mean if I could get a equal or better property for the same amount? Make sure you're going down those pathways. Okay. Now, in the short sale addendum, you have a date, right, to get third-party approval. And that's why in our disclosure, we said it may go past that. If it goes past it, here's a very important phrase to remember in section 4. If you go past the third party approval deadline, it's not voidable. The purchase contract is deemed automatically canceled. It's done. So if you're all got your heads nodding in the right direction, buyer, seller, third party, but the third party gets it to you a day late, guess what you're gonna have to do? Amend the contract because it was canceled.
And Matt,
Yeah.
I learned in the years of doing short sales that you have to update your file with the bank every 30 days. And if you don't, you may have some details that have expired, pricing may have changed. There are so many variables, and you could be stuck as the agent for covering a difference. So timeframes are really critical to keep track of.
Oh man, I'm glad you brought that up, Joyce. We're all like, it's like I've been, what is it? 11 years since my big wreck and breaking my back and ribs and punctured lungs and all that stuff. And you know what? I totally forget all about all the pain because it's so long ago. And it's kind of the same way with short sales. A short sale is our Repsy on steroids because there's so much information that has to be processed. Dates, like you said, have to be paid attention to, updates with banks and all these additional requirements. And I'm going to editorialize here for a minute. When these become more significant, it would be a strong consideration. I know I've done it in the past. I'm like, can I do all this stuff? Yeah, I can. Guess what happens when they become more mainstream? There's groups that pop up that
This is
say,
Norm Robbins. Just calling to let you know I've got my counter in.
Thanks, Norm. I muted you, don't worry. But it's good to know that Norm has his counter in. I wish you the best of luck, Norm. No, we need to, what's the saying? Jack of all trades, master of none. As these become more mainstream, if I was a practicing agent, I'd be looking at this going, you know what? If a company has taken these and they've got experience with Wells Fargo and Bank of America, and they know people and they know the process and they know the timelines and they know the updates, is it worth paying them, one of the 3% or whatever their charge is to manage that process and get it through? I don't know about you guys, but I would tend to punt that one and let them handle it because it's not highest and best use of my time to chase paperwork, dates, people on a deal that potentially might blow up. You tracking me? So I'm not saying you have to. You're 100% entitled to handle these yourself. And you know what? If you're highly organized and you've got good systems, it's maybe not as problematic. But for some of us who aren't great with our paperwork, just consider, paying for it. And I don't know, the TC department may get specialized on that, as those things become more and more prominent. And there'll probably be a slight upcharge, but not anything significant. So, all right. Moving on.
Matt, can I also add that the paperwork historically was ominous, and by the time buyers that are not experienced look through the paperwork and see all the liability waivers and everything, it feels a lot like you're buying a meth house.
Yeah, I can see the similarities. Yeah. Again, I don't want to create total fear, uncertainty, and doubt on these, just a little bit, right? So that you understand it's so far from a slam dunk. So, all right. Here's another interesting point. Earnest money. It gives, in the short sale addendum, there's quite a different degree of flexibility when it comes to earnest money. You notice the first checkbox here, right? As required per the Repsy. Guess what was almost never checked on short sales? That one. And then the second one was no later than 4 days after the third party approval as defined in section 2 above. Now, that one was very common. Why? Because quite literally, the buyer had no skin in the game. There was no earnest money vulnerable. And so they could get into a contract in first position, and I use the term first position because that is almost meaningless, But to Mary Ann's point, you know, you go put in an offer on one or two or three of these short sales, and your client's not really having to expose themselves with having 3 or 4 earnest money in place. So again, this is all information to equip you for when you have a buyer that says, I absolutely have to do a short sale. I want to do a short sale. I think just having this level of knowledge with the disclosure and the short sale addendum, you can point out some reasons why it's not going to be in their best interest, or at least do it in parallel with a traditional purchase. All right, section 6 is huge. Seller's right to cancel, seller's right to accept backup offers, right? And so I highlighted the 4 options here. You can continue to market the property to other interested buyers, and frankly, the bank may require that. B, continue to advertise it on the MLS. And C, accept additional backup offers, and we explained how that could blow up on the original buyer. And D, seller may or may not submit any such backup contracts to the third party for review. So if you're making a backup offer, which is even less solid, realize that in the short sale addendum, the seller has the discretion whether to even submit your offer. So, man, it's riddled with challenges. So the last one I wanted to touch on is this section in red under the buyer's and seller's right to cancel. So let me read this one. If at any time prior to third-party approval or the third-party approval deadline, whichever occurs first, the buyer or seller determines that their circumstances have changed and it is no longer in their best interest to pursue the sale or purchase of the property, either buyer or seller may cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the other party. If you needed one paragraph to explain how tenuous a short sale is for your buyer, that's the one right there. I mean, yes, you still have all the requirements for paperwork and updates and submissions to the third party, and it can all be a waste of time based on this little section right here. So remember that section. When somebody comes to you adamant that they've got to do a short sale, make sure you read this with them. Okay. And one last interesting note is notice on the dates here on E. Buyer and seller agree that if any of the dates referenced in section 8 above fall on a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, performance shall be required on the next business day. So there is some weirdness. I don't know why. Honestly, I have no idea. I'm sure there's a reason, but why UAR didn't stay consistent with other dates as defined in the REPC. They made this interesting little modification in the short sale addendum. Okay. Questions so far? I know we've covered a lot of territory. I wanted to lastly just kind of show you this one, not spend a ton of time on it, but it is the secondary backup contract for a short sale. And there's buyer's acknowledgments, right? And again, making it perfectly clear that they are in a backup position. And then a similar paragraph, right? Seller may or may not submit this offer, and they may accept or any additional backup contract to the applicable third party. If this REPC is submitted, there's a big conditional, then the seller agrees to let the buyer know, the one in backup position, within 4 days that they did go ahead and submit to the third party. So like several of you said, there are, it's contractually where the REPC is at least mostly straightforward. When you start doing a short sale, it becomes kind of spaghetti. There's competing dates, times, timelines, people who can approve or reject at their sole discretion. So just go in with eyes wide open. All right, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second. Maybe. There we go. 2 other things I wanted to quickly cover in the last few minutes that we have here. These are going to be a little more a 30,000 foot view. I wrote down here, whenever I have a meeting, I try and start off with wins, and then it jogged a thought in my mind. Ron Snow and I have a chance to talk pretty regularly, and he constantly reminds me. In fact, I have it right in front of me on my wall. Win, win. And that's not what you think it is. It's an acronym that he quotes quite often. What's important now? So I want you all to write that down. There's power in making your hand write something down. Win. What's important now? And I want to just ask some questions for you. Maybe we'll get some comments, but initially it's just rhetorical. So here are my questions for you. In that category, do you have properties listed and or contract currently? Those should be of very high importance. So that acronym of what's important now, don't let yourself get distracted until you've done the work on your listed and under contract properties. Anybody want to disagree with me on that one? I mean, I'm open for a good debate. It just seems to make sense. Stuff that's closer to producing a paycheck, you probably ought to pay attention to versus something that's further away. Second one, do you have a plan? And are you acting on that plan to stay in the forefront of mind with your client base? All of you are probably going to be like, oh, yeah, I do. And if I were to sit down with you and ask more detailed questions, it may not be as good of a plan as you think. So spend some time thinking. And is that important? Let me just ask, because the acronym is what's important now. You know that phrase, when was the best time to plant a tree? Anyone? Come on.
20 years
30
ago.
years ago.
20
Okay.
years ago.
We'll just say years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree?
Now.
Now. So with that mental image, if you're not working your sphere or you haven't been working your sphere, start planting that today. Figure out a plan. Why do we say that? Why is that something we talk about? NAR does stats on this all the time. It's like a 20-to-1 ratio of effectiveness of all other marketing versus working with your sphere, right? They are the people you know and that like you and know you have a significant impact on your business. And guess what? They have kids, they've got parents, they've got brothers and sisters, they have people in the neighborhood. If you're doing it right and your conversations with them, you know, ask meaningful questions and therefore build good relationships, it becomes a huge boon to your business. And I don't know about you guys, when I got into the business years ago, 22, 3 years ago, I did it with intention. I wanted something that provided not just financial value, but intrinsic value, which is defined non-monetary value. I wanted people to be like, I'm glad I worked with Matt. He did a good job for me, got my family into a house. My family life was fantastic, right? Because we moved into a great neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. And I hope you've all had that experience where people come back to you after the fact and they're just kind of grinning and like, man, thanks for helping me get into that house. God, that is rewarding, right? It's nice to be paid along the way for sure, but I hope that's at least part of your motivation as well. So work your SOI, not just for the financial reason, but for the intrinsic value. All right, third one. Are you having real estate conversations daily? Parker, you and I have talked about this for years since we've known each other for years. Why does that even matter? I mean, who cares if I don't have a real estate conversation today?
You got to keep the tools sharp. I remember I took a little sabbatical from real estate a couple of years ago, i.e. depression. And when I got back in the saddle, I realized how much I loved real estate. But then I started having conversations and I realized how out of the loop I was and how uneducated I sounded. And it forced me, I mean, it inspired me really to get back on the train again. What I mean by that is every morning when I come in, I sit down, I look at NAR, I look at Yahoo Finance Real Estate, I look at the MLS, and I study the information. And so that I know that when on my daily conversations with past clients or with new clients, I could talk about what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening with inventory, why it's happening, and
Wait a minute.
why it
So you
affects it.
mean, so that you could provide value?
Yeah.
Huh, that's weird. Yeah. Here's the point, and thanks, Parker. Here's the point. If you're not having them daily, think of it as a bucket that has a slow trickle out the bottom. If you don't keep putting water in, eventually it's going to run dry. And we as practitioners are notorious for this. We'll queue up, we'll get a bunch of transactions going, we'll stop paying attention to continuing to put water in the bucket. And meanwhile, those transactions eventually run out the bottom, and then you're left with nothing, right? And it's episodic. And that's why, honestly, the vast majority of agents, their income does this, and then it does this, and then it does this, and then it does this. And so just making it a regular course of business to have real estate conversations. And listen, I don't care what that looks like. It can take on 100 different forms. But I think as a general rule, you should sit at the end of the day, every day, and be like, okay, how many legitimate real estate conversations did I have today? And I don't mean, hey, I don't know anybody who wants to buy or sell in the next 30 days. You know, if that's your thing, cool. But I mean, just like you said, Parker, if somebody asking, you know, at the gym or somebody in my neighborhood or whatever, I get these all the time. I'm sure you do. It's like, hey, what's going on in the market? One, that's a good sign. They at least know I'm still in the business. But what a waste if we don't have something to say, something of intelligence and significance or of value. And guess what? They may not be the end audience. You may share it with them, and then they're going to have Sunday dinner with somebody in their family who's in a real estate, and it finds a way down the stream. And so if you do that on a daily basis, consistency always freaking wins. I don't know how to say that more impactful. Consistency always wins. Just going to let that one hang in the air for a minute. All right. Last two things. Are you practicing and polishing your skill sets? I talked about the framework last week. It's good that we're internalizing it and that we've kind of got the steps. You guys were able to get most of the steps back out. But rhetorical question, how many of you actually practiced it in the last 2 weeks? And I don't mean practicing it on the actual client or somebody you're interacting with. I'm talking about practicing to make sure you're better at it, like using one of your teenage kids or your significant other or somebody you work with and say, hey, listen, I know it's a little awkward. I want you to role play with me for 5 minutes, right?
Matt, I tell the agents on our team a lot, right? Prospecting, practicing, writing offers in that order, right? And I think prospecting is obviously key. Everyone knows that. But practicing what you're saying, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people that are just like, I don't know what to say, or I get nervous, or I get, lip tight, or whatever the case is. The ability to just like say, all right, go practice in the shower, go practice in the mirror, go call your mom and say, Mom, I need you to be a buyer while I'm the real estate agent. Stuff like this can really move the Richter forward in building your confidence. And really what we're talking about here is, how do I build my confidence so I'm comfortable saying these things to this person?
It's funny you mentioned a mirror. If you're that awkward that you can't pull somebody aside like, hey, we're friends, I need your help. I need you to do this with me, right? I'm going on a listing and I know there's going to be this issue, right? Role play with me for a second. I want to make sure I get this right and be honest with me. If that's too awkward for you, yeah, use the mirror. Even that has value. When you see yourself saying what you think you're saying and how good you think you are, and you see it in a mirror, it's like, oh crap, maybe I should role play. Maybe I need to find somebody to do this on a regular basis. And that's not to beat us up. It's just human nature, guys, right? You look at all the guys who present well, even in our industry, Jared James and Buffini or whoever else. You think they sit there and just wing it? They absolutely have a script, a dialogue, whatever you want to call it. Don't get caught up in the term. Parker used the term prospecting. I'm like, conversations. I don't get whatever the term is, right? Get good at it. All right, last one. And I mentioned it earlier, since part of your value add is knowing your contracts. are you creating a file folder? I've told the agents I've been affiliated with for years, it's stupid to reinvent the wheel. So when you take an hour out of your day like today and you go through a short sale addendum, man, make sure you capture the value, make sure you get a highlighted copy, and you have a repository, a file folder, electronic or physical or whatever. For years I had, and Parker, I had you do this when you first came on. I would have you create a folder of the buyer documents, the REPSI, the buyer due diligence, right? All the things that were important, and have them highlighted. And guess what? It was never a bad idea to put that in front of somebody, because they see that and be like, oh, dang, this guy actually knows his contracts, has invested his time. I feel pretty comfortable knowing he's going to take care of me, right?
I still to this, Matt, I still to this day, when I'm traveling or something like that, I'll print off a bunch of different contracts that I'm not familiar with or I'm not confident with. I'll sit on the airplane and I'll read through it and I'll highlight it of the things that are really important. Okay, what is the liability to the buyer? What's the liability to the seller? What is this conditioned on? All of these types of things.
Anticipate the questions they may have, and then remind yourself of the framework. How am I going to resolve these when they bring up the issue, right? So listen, we're out of time, so I want to just say this. I am a contract guy. I get it. I have a little bit more of a contract mind, and you guys think I'm joking when I say that. I actually just did a DISC analysis, right? Personality analysis. And my analytical didn't come back as high as I thought it would. It was more expressive and persuasive. But here's what I know. Paying attention to it over time and having a system, when I go to get on a call, either with an individual or a presentation like this, I have a library that I've used for years, guys. And the fact that I marked it and reviewed them for years makes me a contract guy. He's a contract geek. No, I turned myself into a contract geek, right? By having a system, paying attention, having a library, reviewing it, and everybody, well, it just comes natural to you. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. I just invested the time, and it doesn't take a lot. So that's my final encouragement to you today. If you want today's marked up documents, send me an email. I'll send them to you. Every time you're on this call, you want the marked up documents, you have to pay a price. Yeah, it's a huge price. You send me an email, and I will send it back to you. Okay? You guys are the best. Honestly, love working with you. I love your personalities. I love your work ethic. I love your integrity. So go out there and have a great week. All right.
Thanks, Dan. Or thanks, Matt. Sorry.
Parker, you're
wow,
welcome.
Parker, that ended with a thud.
Anytime, pal. Anytime.
Is that stat, dude?
That on recording.
All right. Have a good one. See ya.
Here for you,
Thanks,
bud.
Matt.